I'm here recording and getting ready for a meeting, so I got myself hooked up to the Rodecaster Pro, which will give me much better audio. And I'm also talking to my camera here as well, so getting ready for a good session. I took the timing was impeccable. I took what was it? It was like a racial justice class last week. I guess my realization is like my calling is like I want to get in this fight. And so then it's just as I'm working with these white teams, I'm like, I hear all this stupid crap all day long, right? And then it's like I feel like I need to be saying something about it rather than just being complicit and sitting there. And someone today, like I was in a meeting, and said, we're basically going through the civil movement right now, the Spanish flu of 1918, and pretty soon the Great Depression, right? At some point, all three all at once. And so I'm a little tired. I think the Floyd thing is really hitting me pretty hard now. I think what's really hitting me the hardest is the fact that there's so much of the world that is just annoyed by it, right? It's a nuisance. It's an annoyance versus something truly important that's going on right now. I just got out of a meeting earlier, and most people are just like, do we acknowledge it? Do we not acknowledge it? And I think one person wanted to do something silly to kind of lighten the tone of the meeting, and it just feels tone deaf. And I think that's what's weighing me down. Is like that's the reality. If you're in a position of privilege, like this is just a nuisance to you. Whereas I think people's lives are at risk and people's ability to survive, thrive, just isn't there. And for people to be doing stupid ass shit is frustrating. I'm tired of looking on Facebook, and I'm tired of looking on the internet, and people are talking about bread and other useless things right now. I don't know. Had a good therapy session to talk about this. The only thing I know is to just sit with this discomfort. I'm reading some books. I'm going to read this book on white fragility. I need to understand it a little bit more because I don't understand it. I think I'm tired of caregiving. Tell people that it's okay, that you're good when you do stupid stuff. Man, this sucks. I don't want to do this work. I think I need to figure out a way to it all comes back to mindfulness, I think, and just being able to have that space capacity to work on this. But man, it's just I'm going to see a lot of stupid ass shit. Well, it's Friday morning. It's been a rough week. I stopped the vlog. This would have been vlog number 20, and I'll publish it as 20, but I didn't feel right to continue documenting. And I wanted to just sit in the discomfort. Last week, I attended a racial justice, racial equity class by Race Forward, and the timing couldn't have been better or worse, depending on what your vantage point is, but it's been a difficult week because the murder of George Floyd is just erupting in this country, and I'm trying to reconcile my part of it. I grew up Asian American. My parents were refugees from the Vietnam War. And I was born in a refugee camp, and I came here in the U.S. When I was 6 months. And I think as part of the Vietnamese American immigrant refugee experience, we assimilated. We tried to become as American as possible, and gave up a lot of our identity along in the process. And so I think growing up, I related to white, although I was not. I'm looking at a picture of myself in first grade, and I was the only person of color in the entire class. And I'm not sure what 18 years of being the only person of color, how that impacts you. I do know my first experience just being around with people that were similar to me was at the University of Washington when I joined the Vietnamese Student Association. And I remember just vividly one of the comments was like, when I was running for an officer role in the organization, one person said, "You're not Vietnamese enough." And so, if I'm not Vietnamese enough and I'm not American enough, what am I? And so that lack of identity also just puts you, or puts me, in this little no person zone, right? I don't belong in any world. And as I'm trying to figure out how I engage in this movement and Black Lives Matter, and I think just for many, many years and the majority of my life, I've been just complicit. Have not participated in this. I'm not black enough. I'm not a person of color. The reality is it's a myth, right? This model minority myth, being a Asian that's good at math. I follow the rules. And the only thing that impacts me is the glass ceiling, right? You can't move up because the system is rigged against you. And so I think I've been struggling with this over this past week and trying to figure out where I land. And for me, I think it's a reshift. COVID has already changed how 1980 is being designed and formed, and I think this is the additional leg to that stool, which is putting a racial equity lens first. And so I think as I'm doing the work, and just I'm doing regular work right now that has nothing to do with racial equity, and I think one thing I have been a little more aggressive is calling things out when it's tone deaf, when it's I guess we're not even supposed to use tone deaf, but calling things out when it's not moving the mission forward. And I think having been in organizations, having worked on projects where there is no diversity, there is a weakness. It's that you don't see the world as complete. And I think when you live in complete privilege, you are able to, you don't live in that constant anxiety state. And for myself, I've been living in a constant anxiety state, and I've learned to cope with it, not necessarily thrive with it, but I've coped with it, and that's simply just internalizing it. And so a lot of the meetings I've worked with in more diverse teams, they've given each other space because they need that space. So I have no answers. I just read White Fragility, and I'm reading another book on mindfulness as part of this fight for racial equity. And I think mindfulness is the answer to a lot of things, which is having that space, giving yourself that space, giving yourself the tools to process the pain that comes in with this work. And part of the white fragility is just, people live in that privilege and they never have to deal with anything hard. And so when something comes up and it's discomforting, they freak out. And all of a sudden, as a person of color, I have to run in and care give. And so I think pushing the mission forward on my end, I'm going to be pushing it through mindfulness. I'm going to be pushing some programs we're calling resilient leadership. So creating leadership programs not centered around racial equity, because I think it can be a little off-putting in it, but we're going to sneak it in. We're going to sneak in broccoli into the meal. You're not going to know it. Because as part of resilient leadership is having that racial equity lens, having the ability to feel, and having the ability to engage when it's discomforting, because it will be. So that's it. It's going to be a rough week, and it's going to be a rough time going forward. But that's part of the journey, and that's part of the discomfort. So I'm looking forward to acknowledging what's going on and being a part of it. A couple tactical things. One, once revenues pick up a little bit, I'm going to start diverting a percentage of my revenues towards, I think I'm picking books for prisoners. I know everyone's rushing out to donate to Black Lives Matter and other things, but I think the prison system is one level of oppression, and I wanted to do my small part in it. Second, the most important thing is just educating myself. I think a lot of people are just throwing money at it. Like, you can't buy yourself out of it. I'm going to learn more about what's going on, learn more about history, and experience it more. Followed a bunch of amazing Black artists, Black developers, Black entrepreneurs on Twitter, and it's changing how I see and engage in the world. And it's not public yet, but we're starting to build out things for some offerings and services around this work. And there's a lot of people doing this work already, so we're not going to try to replicate that. We're trying to come about it in a different direction, and hopefully we all push the needle forward. I love you all.